All right, very good. Thank you for joining us this evening for Introducing Faith Intellectually, Duty to God in a Modern Time. Tonight's presenter will be Stephen Scheid. As a previous pastor, chaplain, and charter org rep, Stephen has sat on many Eagle boards. The question of duty to God has found particular significance. He wants to help connect the ever-increasing nuns to the meaning of duty to God and a hope in faith. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Susan. So I appreciate each one of you being here. I find this topic to be one of utmost importance. If you look at the history of the scouting movement with a keen eye, you will see that the foundation is solid. It's unbent in its trajectory toward the future. The oaths and the law are that foundation upon which all scouting is founded, and it's firm. So tonight we're going to be looking at introducing faith intellectually, and I do want to start a bit with history. Then we'll look at where we stand in the present time, and we'll move into an open discussion. Primarily looking through BP's eyes, we can see that he was asked, where are we at in scouting? Is it a religious movement? And I think most of you have already heard this response, but it's really an intriguing summary that there is no religious side of the movement. The whole of it is based on religion. And Baden-Powell could have stopped there, but he went on to clarify on the realization and service of God. That actually sets a point of understanding, the realization, which is kind of an understanding and development of a faith, not necessarily a religion, but a realization and service of God. BP kind of kicked me when he said this one. He said, old Socrates spoke truly when he said, no man goeth about a more godly purpose than when he who is mindful to the right upbringing, not only of his own, but other men's children. I wanted to thank you for being here tonight, and think about that. Our mission as Boy Scouts of America particularly is to prepare youth to make moral and ethical choices over their lifetime by instilling in them the characters of oath and the law. To speak of ethical decisions is to speak separate from moral decisions. Moral decisions invoke their spiritual side, which is important. And duty to God in the BSA is still alive today. In 2018, the National Executive Board adopted a resolution, and that resolution reaffirmed its unequivocal commitment to the Declaration of Religious Principles. So the founding of Scouting in 1908 in the UK and 1910 in the BSA was a time period in which we don't really think about what actually happened. There was this time period when we were beginning to hit the industrial age. Children were actually coming into factories to work. We hadn't developed laws against child labor at the time. Education hadn't formed itself completely. During that time period, there was a massive move toward working with children. Well, that massive move came out of two key elements. One, the situation of the time, and the second one, particularly in the United States, was the Third Great Awakening. So it was a time period of revival amongst the Protestant church, particularly. And that led to the working with children throughout a large and a broad set of organizations. So it wasn't just Boy Scouts that came out of that time period. Wordcraft Indians, the Sons of Daniel Boone, Campfire Girls, Girl Scouts, the YMCA, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Clubs, and 4-H were all formed within that short period of time. The interesting dynamic about it is that each of those people who were a part of forming those groups also happened to know each other very well. The Gulicks, who developed Campfire, also were friends with James E. West. James E. West actually was friends with Seton and Beard. They each had conversation with Baden-Powell. Baden-Powell also spoke with Juliet Gordon Lowe, who started the Girl Scouts. So what we're looking at is a confluence of people in a time, and it opened up a new door. James E. West was pivotal in the United States, particularly in developing Boy Scouts of America. But with all great leaders, empathy comes from trial and experience. And those trials is often deep levels of trial. James West was orphaned early. He had to fight tuberculosis. James West also finished high school 2 years early. Now, here's the interesting part about that. He had to beg for permission to attend school outside of his orphanage. And he only got to do it after all of his chores were done throughout the day. He was an extremely motivated person who walked with a limp for a good portion of his, from his childhood on. He worked his way through law school, and in law school, he actually got to see children being treated as adults in the court system because there was no developed system for juvenile court. That brought him to gravitate toward child's issues and push for the development of the juvenile court system. He worked with the YMCA, and in fact was the director of the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association. And then he got called into service into Washington, D.C. as the Washington Playground Association president. So you gotta kind of think about this character who actually did not want to be the chief scout of Boy Scouts of America. He said he would do it on an interim basis. So this man who was deeply involved and deeply empathetic, but also had a deep level of faith, got called into service and ended up spending till 1941, from 1911, as the chief scout. In those 30 years, he oversaw the connection of troops in America. There were numerous Baden-Powell charter troops. He also saw the official handbook. And here's where it gets interesting in BSA's religious statement. He was instrumental in expanding the third part of the Scout Oath, to help people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. He also pushed to add the 3 parts to the Scout Law, which were not in Baden-Powell's original law: brave, clean, and reverent. To cement the ability of Boy Scouts of America to grow within the country, as churches were on a steep uprise coming out of the Great Awakening, the Third Great Awakening, he appealed to partnerships with religious groups from across the nation.
Hey, Stephen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're no longer sharing your screen. I don't know if you could bring your PowerPoint back up for us.
I don't know when that stopped.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You got it.
When did it die? Do you know? Could you tell me?
Just a minute or two ago. I didn't want to interrupt you because you're on a roll.
Sorry.
Yes, this is where we were. Thank you.
Okay. So for the sake of our recording, I will show those 2 slides for a moment. So we were talking about James West's appeal to religious partners as charters from across the United States. What was interesting is the YMCA began to charter partners all over the across the United States. James West brought together all those Baden-Powell troops and started to conform to a single group where the oath and the law were solidified in the United States. The other thing that he did is he reached out to specific faith groups. He reached out to the LDS, who joined fairly rapidly in 1913. The Catholics in 1913 had been asking Boy Scouts, scouts within the Catholic Church to not join Boy Scouts because they saw it predominantly as a Protestant group. By 1913, that decision had changed with the Catholic Church. By 1920, the Methodists at the time, they weren't united then, joined. And what we start to see is this collection of open doors to religious groups across a wide expanse. So that's our history place. That's the where from. So if you look at this, now you're going to start to ask the question, where to? So if you look at it, what you're going to see is the purple line is called the nuns. We're looking at religious preference since 1948. The blue line is Protestant membership by preference. The black line is Catholic. Overall listed as generic Christian, non-specific is gray. The Jewish is established at the deep red. You've got the LDS at the green. But what is dynamic you should be able to see throughout this is actually that those within the United States who claim no affiliation to any religious organization at all, or even identify themselves as a religious background. They say, I have no religious background, is on a steep increase. To show that a little bit more intriguingly, if you look at generations, the silent generation, 84% of that generation claims Christianity. By the time we get to the millennials, only 49% of them claim Christianity. 40% of them, 40% of millennials claim to be unaffiliated with any specific religion. In the US, the number of religious quote unquote nuns, which is what they call that group, they've identified with no religious background, has grown by nearly 30 million over the past decade. What we're looking at is a whole new wave of experience. 35% of Gen Z identifies as agnostic or atheist, or says that none of the categories, Christian, Catholic, or other faith, describes them as a person. The differential as you go down through the ages is substantial. And the largest growing groups in there is the atheist and the no association groups. We are connecting now as an older generation with a younger generation who sees things significantly different. We need to be aware of that. We need to take that into consideration. There's some key takeaways from those 3 slides. Atheism, no God, no belief in God, is growing from generation to generation at a rate that has never been seen before. Agnosticism, which many youth actually don't understand that term. They understand the idea of atheism, but they don't actually understand the idea of agnosticism, where there may be a God. I don't want to define God. There is something higher. I don't have a definition for it. Is also increasing though. Designated faith, saying I'm a part of this group, is in steep decline. Atheism is growing, agnosticism is growing, and being a part of a religious group is in decline. When you pair up those thoughts, specifically with the idea that Baden-Powell believed that no person could become the best citizen without some form of faith, you start to see that there's a significant problem in our country. I have a short video from YouTube that I like to share. I've been sharing this with Cub Scouts because it opens up the door of faith from a different, unique point of view. We have multiple faiths represented who will share what they see as faith. Let me start this video. if it wants to go.
Can't see it.
Oh, God.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Let's swap screens.
There you go.
Okay. Fantastic. And I'm going to make sure my volume is all the way up so you can hear it. And I lost it. Where'd it go?
Food is fun. I'm Sarah, and I am 10 years old. I'm 4, and I'm Toby. By law, I'm Jewish, but I don't know if I necessarily believe in it. I believe in Buddhism. I believe in God. For me, it's a really big baby. Part of me believes in God a lot, and a part of me definitely doesn't. Because maybe there is someone upstairs, you know, making great things happen and sprinkling magic on the world. And then you see such bad stuff happen, and you see kids get cancer, and you're like, you doubt or you question God. We have this thing called Gunyam. It's kind of like God, but it's like Chinese. In my religion, we call him Allah. He helps people. God is love. I think God has this really soft voice. I think he would sound like Hoi. I think since he's lived so long, it's kind of washed out. I should make good things happen to the world. This sounds so creepy, like a horror movie. I think it sounds loud. He sounds like really kind, I think. Well, hello? You can see him on the ground. I have legs and I have feet. I think God is in the sky. I pray to the Gunyang to bring us good luck and support my family. Usually what I wish for, I'd like to spend time with my mom all day. I want to have confidence in God. If they control all of us, I want to have confidence that I don't need to pray and tell them to do it. I think they should make great things happen and really prevent the really bad, terrible things. One time I went outside and I prayed to God so I could have flowers. If there is a God, what is it? Like, what do they look like? God looks like a person. Maybe God's a woman, or maybe God doesn't identify as a gender. They're usually gold or white. I think God will have green eyes. Why do I always think of wearing a hoodie? I'm drawing him clothes. I don't really know if he has clothes because I can't draw him naked. I was wearing his masculine God t-shirt. Gotta put that God on there. Put some jewelry on his head. He's in his hoodie, so we're not going to be able to see his hair, guys. I don't think he has hair. I think, it's hard to keep having hair if you've been alive for, this many millions of years. He's kind of self-conscious about not having hair. This one's shaped like a monkey. I just would hope that he would look like a regular person. God is a big head on legs. His hands are very long and big. I know how to make hands, really. I think this circle. Because my hands are circles, see? I don't think he looks like anyone I know. I think he wears, those swag green pants. Very cool green pants, make him a little more colorful. He's got those sick Nikes on. He has a beard. He has orange hair and green eyes. He's big, and he always sits down. He looks kind of funny. He has a blue shirt and blue pants and very hairy arms. I just would like you to think of God, a man or a woman or whatever you want to think of God as, happiness. You should have a big smile when you think of God and when those tickets. Nikes, you know. Thank you for letting me be in this world. World goes round because all these different people have different beliefs in God, and I love that. But I don't think that their beliefs should cause wars. This could be someone fiction. This could be someone man-made. I love that everyone has a different view of God and different beliefs in God, but I don't think it should cause so much commodity or war. I really don't.
Hey, Unsolved is on.
Let me get back to the.
I'm still seeing the video. There you go.
So I know that video, depending on who you are, when it opens up, when it says, I think God and Buddhist fart, people go, whoa, wait a minute. Or some of the other ones like, I don't know if I believe in God. I think the interesting part of what you really need to hear is probably what Toby says the most. He says, I don't know, but I want to have confidence in God. So I want you to think of it more of a different question. Kind of go back to the Jewish proverb. The Jewish proverb says, he who has the faith of his father is blessed. He who has the faith on his own is blessed. He who has both is most blessed. When it comes to faith within youth, we actually need to be willing to look at how do we help them find a faith that they can relate to. This isn't about proselyting, and it's not about religion. It's about finding a place where they can have confidence. And we're going to come back to that specifically because there is a BSA requirement that there be a belief in God. And if you'll notice, I underlined it because G has a little g, as it's stated in the Declaration of Religious Principle. We really do believe that as an organization. To honor the Scout Oath, to do your duty to God, requires that you believe in some higher being. The ability to be reverent, as stated in the Scout Law, is a requirement. The religious reference, the religious reference on the Eagle Scout requirement actually can be fulfilled if a child or youth is not affiliated with an organized religion. The parent or guardian then provides that reference. I've said in numerous Eagle boards when they say, well, this is a parent, we need to throw this out. This doesn't really count. I think often we fail to recognize that if we read the Guide to Advancement, we'll take a moment and read that parental reference with a different view. I also want to clarify what is not the requirement. And before I dive into what's not the requirement, I used to work with a scoutmaster in South Carolina. And the most freeing thing we did as the charter org rep and the scoutmaster was agree that we were going to follow the program. It wasn't going to be our program at all. It was going to be the wisdom of Baden-Powell passed down over time into what BSA offered. The Guide to Advancement would be our answer to parents. So when a parent said, oh, I don't like this, it's really freeing to say, well, it's not my program. If you'd like to talk to BSA National about changing it, go for it. It's okay. But this is not my program. I'm presenting the program, and I'll present it to the best of my abilities. So Boy Scouts of America does not define what constitutes a belief in God or a practice of religion. Neither does the BSA require membership in a religious organization or association for membership in the movement. It doesn't mean scouts and scouters must attend their faith's worship services every week. A scout could practice his faith or her faith privately at home. In an Eagle Board of Review, I had a young man who had been saving his money, working a part-time job, going each summer to Costa Rica and leading a youth mission camp for youth in Costa Rica. One of the guys sitting next to me said, well, he's not being present. He hasn't been present for a summer camp since he was 16. Here he is, 18, thinking he can get his Eagle. The interesting concept about what we're looking at is that really the requirement that he be at those meetings? Or is there the option to actually be living your scouting life and your faith life in community after you've achieved a certain place? When he was at home, he attended troop meetings. And he was a busy kid, very active. So we don't need to be making things into this that actually hold back youth who are already have learned to live into the Scout Oath and Scout Law. So what if you sit down in your board of review, here you are with the Life Scout, and the questions may have been mushy, getting up to that point of Life Scout, and the scout just says, well, I don't believe in God. I'm going to ask you honestly, are you prepared to have that conversation? Then the other question would be, how do you recognize God or God? Because you're going to need to be able to ask that scout a couple more questions. How do you do your duty to God? And how are you reverent if you don't believe in some God? And this is where, as an adult, the reason I talk about introducing faith intellectually is to help a youth find a place for articulating their particular answers to other adults. You should realize that when millennials were asked what has helped their faith grow, church doesn't even make the top 10 factors for millennials on faith development. But I'll tell you one of the things that does. Adults who are mentors. That typically ranks between in the top 2, depending on the background of the person. So some of the top characteristics on a person of people identified by those millennials who a nun or an atheist would be willing to open a discussion about faith was that they need to be open to talking about faith matters with people who listen. You don't force conclusions, but open the doors for conclusions. They demonstrate an interest in other people's stories. So it's not just always one perspective. When some guy says, well, the mountain has always got stone on it, and the person on the other side of the mountain says, no, mountains are always forested. They're both looking at the same mountain. We need to be able to have youth able to see from other people's perspectives and their stories. And they're good at asking questions, which kind of leads us to the next phase of having the conversation. So how many of you have heard of the Socratic method? Those who are Christians will often recognize that as one of the things that happened with Jesus Christ as well. To find an answer to a question is best by answering multiple questions around it to identify the place. Asking and answering questions stimulates a critical thinking. It opens doors, it draws out ideas, and lots of underlining presuppositions. I was having a conversation with my grandson actually yesterday, because he had joined me for one of those sessions that we've been doing for Duty to God for Cub Scouts. And I asked him, put it on mute and asked him, so what do you think about God? I said, I don't believe in God. I said, oh, so what do you believe in? He said, well, I don't really know. And I said, so do you not believe in God, or are you not sure where you're at? Are you questioning? He goes, yeah, I have a lot of questions. I said, you know, it's okay to question. He goes, well, I figured you either had to believe or not believe. And I said, no, actually, it's okay to question. It's okay to open this door. So when I share experiences, I share my personal experiences. But I recognize that other people are not going to be coming from the same direction in their path. You have to really be able to be more nuanced in how you approach youth in having that kind of a conversation. My Scoutmaster friend was fantastic at it. He would say, so if I find a clock on the beach and I pick it up, it just happened, right? Now that's an argument that people use against atheism, but here's the reality of it. We're in the outdoors all the time. And by being in the outdoors, we can see the complexity of how our environment interacts together. We can see the complexity and the marvelous nature that goes all the way down to a DNA, where we're looking at 4 different proteins linked up in series, and somehow it tells everything how to be. There's a lot of miraculous things that we experience that when you look at it, it feels like there should be something more, even if you can't define it. And that's okay. You can be like Toby and just want to have confidence in God. Some ideas from BP. BP would say the atheist maintained that a religion that has to be learnt from books written by men cannot be a true one. But they don't seem to see that besides printed books, God has given us one step, the great book of nature to read. And they cannot say that there is untruth there. The facts stand before them. I do not suggest nature study as a form of worship or as a substitute for religion, but I advocate for the understanding of nature as a step, in certain cases, towards gaining religion. What you should understand is in this article, Rovering to Success, Baden-Powell starts to look at it and says, you know, if we expose youth to nature and we have conversations about the origins of nature, the development of nature, where do natural laws come from? You don't have to answer that question. Open the door and allow them to find a place. BP, and we began with this quote at our Duty to God booth in North America booth at the World Jamboree. Development of outlook naturally begins with the respect for God, which we may best term reverence. Reverence to God and reverence for one's neighbor and reverence for oneself as a servant of God is the basis of every form of religion. The method of expression of reverence to God varies by each sect and denomination. What sect or denomination a boy belongs to depends, as a rule, on his parents' wishes. It is they who decide. It is our business to respect their wishes and to second their efforts to inculcate reverence, whatever form of religion the boy professes. There may be many difficulties relating to the definition of religious training in our movement, but so many different denominations exist, and the details of the expression of duty to God have, therefore, to be largely in the hands of the local authority. But there is no difficulty at all in suggesting the line to take on the human side, since direct duty to one's neighbor is implied in almost every form of belief. As we can talk to Cub Scouts and open the door and say, how do you show your duty to God? I can tell you a 7-year-old says, well, I hold the door for my neighbor. I help my mom wash dishes. From a very early age, youth begin to understand that caring for others is a way of respecting and showing respect for God. And I won't read this. I'll give you a second to read it yourselves. What I want you to know is when Baden-Powell published the article, Religion of the Backwoods, in 1918, he received an extensive amount of backlash from a lot of the formal and organized religious organizations. They believed that what he was saying is that this developed a natural religion of the woods, the experience of a deep level of respect for God, God's nature, for the desire to strive, but to strive for service of others, that comes out of experiencing the power of nature in our lives, didn't necessarily need to be cloaked in a robe or sat in a pew to be something that was a deep part of a person's heart. And when he went back to churches, he explained that what he was talking about is actually a different kind of connection. It's not liturgy and music, but it's the music of the birds. It's the liturgy of the squirrels in the morning as they chirp along. Those are things that actually have the power to change how we see the vast creator of whatever we're standing in, whether it be out on a boat in the ocean or in the middle of the woods themselves. If you're going to be prepared to help a child walk through the Socratic life, asking questions and find God, you need to have something yourself. You need to be asking yourself, are you growing? Things that aren't growing are dying. So continue to grow. Baden-Powell said, religion seems a very simple thing. First, love and serve God. Second, love and serve your neighbor. It is the common ground on which most forms of religion are based, namely the appreciation of God and service to one's neighbor. If you're serving, and obviously you're here tonight, you have already started this process of growth. The question now is to continue to grow, not just because you're serving, but growing in faith because you're serving. We need to help kids find that answer. Those who say, I'm an atheist. Help them to ask the question about what that greater source, whether you call it God or not, might be. Wisdom takes I think, a pretty keen look at it. They said a careful analysis of the founder's writings showed that the concept of a force above man is basic to scouting. The whole educational approach to the movement consists in helping young people to transcend the material world and go in search of the spiritual values of life. When a youth can look at the scoutmasters across the lane at an Eagle Court of Honor and say, I believe in a higher source. The challenge for us adults is to recognize that that's good enough. And Reverend, the activities of the member of the Boy Scouts of America shall be carried on under conditions which show respect to the convictions of others. Whatever convictions those are, we need to open the door of respect to everybody and the convictions of others in matters of custom and religion, as required by the 12th point of the Scout law, reading Reverend. A Scout is reverent toward God, and he is faithful in his religious duties. He respects the beliefs of others. I had a very profound set of conversations while I was at the World Jamboree. I was a part of the Duty to God in North America booth, and we did beads on a string. And one of the young men came to the door and he said, I'm an atheist. Why would I want to come in here? I said to him, I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to open doors, to have a conversation, and to help. So we started with 2 quotes from Baden-Powell. Perspective begins with a respect for God. And God put us in this jolly world to be happy and to enjoy life. And he reflected back to where he was at in his journey, was that there was not a lot of jolly life, that he was really challenged. And I asked him, I said, so what's challenging you? And he said, well, Mike, there's just a lot of stuff going on. And I said, well, one of the challenges with this is, coming to a place of finding hope when everything else fails. So I handed some beads to him, and he started feeding them onto his rope, his little paracord, purple paracord, and they actually fell off. I helped him pick up his beads, and I tied a knot on the end of it, and I handed it back to him. And at that moment, something spurred in me that I hadn't thought of before. We all have a rope that's our life. And life is going to throw beads at us. But if there's not something bigger that ties the knot at the end of our rope, when our humanity fails, or the humanity around us fails, we fall apart. The next generation, which is headed toward nuns, also has the highest rate of suicide of any generation that's been around currently. I'm afraid for the generation coming behind them. But we have things that we can do as scout leaders that are a part of everyday scouting. We can take youth out into the woods, to those places. We can take them to the tops of mountains, out into the ocean, to those places where they see something bigger than themselves that sparks something deep inside. I was with one youth out at Sea Base. We were standing there watching the sunset, and the rays of light started to come down as we were eating dinner through the clouds. And he looked over at me and he said, Mr. Steve, look. And I said, yeah, it's really cool. And he goes, no, it's like the movies when God looks down on you. He puts his finger in the clouds and he pulls the clouds open. This was one of those moments with a young man who didn't go to church, who wasn't raised in a church type home or a synagogue or a mosque. But when he looked out, he saw this place where he connected his personal experience at the moment directly to something larger and bigger than anything he had experienced before. And I looked over at him and I expressed my expression of faith. And I said, yep, God loves you. And he had been struggling so deeply in his own personal lives, he began to cry. The other guys were kind of looking at him like, what was going on? So he took some time, went down into the ship, and he cried to himself. I don't think that that young man had been told in his lifetime that God loved him. When the moment that God reaches out and creates a sunset for us, God is giving an expression that opens a door for growth. One thing that is unique is, as humans, we are struck by these big and small things, and we can't explain why. We just can't even explain why. There's no science to say, why is it that a person's heart leaps at the sunrise? All the colors appeal to us. There's just nothing there. But there is something there, and it's bigger than just the daily perspective. This picture is taken from 1918. It was Boy Scouts standing around the rally cry, "The war is over, but our work is not." So while they were celebrating the peace that came at the end of the World War I, they recognized that the future was in their hands as scouts. So I'll leave you with these words from Baden-Powell and a question. Let us therefore keep in training our scouts, keep the higher aims in the forefront, not let ourselves get too absorbed in the steps. Don't let the technical outweigh the moral. Field efficiency, backwoodsmanship, camping, hiking, good turns, jamboree, camaraderie are all means, not the end. The end is character with a purpose. Our objective in the scouting movement is to give such help as we can in bringing about God's kingdom on earth by including among youth the spirit and the daily practice in their lives of unselfish goodwill and cooperation. Are you ready to join the future now? If you guys would like, this would be a great time to open up with some conversation.
You've had some good comments in the chat, no questions, but just some good observations if you want to look through those. Or if anybody wants to just shout them out.
Very deep, man. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Richard.
it.
You did a great job of organizing this and doing the research, so thank you for sharing. A couple of comments that I'd like to make is one of the questions I always ask in a board or review, and it doesn't matter which one, I'm also encouraging the Scouts BSA leaders in my district to do this as well, is very carefully listen to the answer to posing the question to them, what does duty to God mean to you? And the answers go all over the place, but usually there is already some sort of kernel of a belief in a higher power. One of the most surprising answers actually came from those who actually go to church. They actually said, well, I go to church, period. Nothing more added. And it's like, yeah, and? So that also opens up the door for other conversations to get them think in a more broad sense to look into the scout law on a daily basis. So I wanted to share that. Secondly, I think you're absolutely spot on with regards to your experiences with atheists. Most of the time, when a youth says, well, I'm an atheist, it's not like they're rejecting the concept of God. They are so unsure that, and based on a lot of different negativity things that are out there in the media with churches and church leaders, they are not seeing the value of religion, therefore they're not seeing the value of God. And I think that's where we also can step up. And as someone mentioned in the chat window, use effective listening and help them understand what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, what they're thinking. Thank you.
Absolutely. 2 ears, 1 mouth. At least 50% more listening. I would also make a slightly different point, that a belief in God and a religion can be separate. Religion is the organized practice that we use to express our belief in God. When I teach God in church, I often ask the youth, well, why do we do this in liturgy? Why do we do that in songs? Why do we sing that type of song? And they usually don't have an answer. Now, these are older scouts, you know, and they really can't answer. And I said, well, you know, my uncle, he founded a church, and it's called the Face North Scratch Your Head Church, because he had a very deep relationship with God. And he was walking up the sidewalk facing north, scratching his head, and God spoke to him. And in that moment of speaking with him, he went, wow, that was profound. So when he got home, he thought about it, and he thought about it. And he said, what was I doing when God showed up? Oh, that's it. I was facing north and scratching my head. So every Sunday he gets up and he faces north and scratches his head and wonder why God's not showing up. He's abandoned the daily talking with God and relationship that he used to have. You know, at least as many times as he texts his girlfriend in a day, at least as many emojis as he sends out in a day, he spent talking to God, but he let go of that because he thought, well, all I need to do is go to church. The magic recipe is scratch my head and face north. And they all went, oh. Now, this isn't to demean the things that we do that open the door for the Spirit to work within us and together. But it does open the conversation of why do we do what we do in a religious sense versus my relationship with God, whatever relationship you have. I see Don has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Summer camp and jamborees give us a wonderful time to spend time with the Scouts. But I'm the religious emblems coordinator for our council. And so I spend a lot of my time at displays at conferences and University of Scouting and College of Commissioner Service and round tables. I don't have time. And when parents and or scouts come up to me and they're looking at the display and I say, what is your faith? And they say, I don't have a faith, or I don't believe in God, or whatever. I've got a second before they're gone off to another display. Does anybody have any suggestions on where to go from there? I don't have time to cry. I don't want to cry. It's not a good environment. So anybody have any suggestions on the next step, the talking point?
It's not a bad thing to recognize that you don't have time and use that Socratic method and ask, hey, I know you say you don't believe in God, so let me ask you a couple questions. Why doesn't a sunset appeal to people? Research the science on it and see if you can find out why a sunset appeals to a human being. And that kind of thing isn't really about, if a person is not seeking, if they're not asking questions, that means they don't want answers. The whole point of asking a question is to find answers. So if they're not questioning, and when a youth says, I've questioned my faith in God, I want a confidence in God, but I just don't know, man, that is even a more powerful statement. You're looking. How many kids go to church on a Sunday morning because they're comfortable with sitting in the mosque or kneeling in the mosque or going to a synagogue or sitting in a church pew, and they don't question? So if we go back to the Jewish proverb that says, the person who has the faith of their fathers is blessed, well, they are. The person who finds their own faith is blessed. But the most blessed is the person who has both. The one who questioned their father's faith and found the reason why they do what they do. And they found where it connected to themselves. And this is not necessarily an easy conversation. I'm not saying this is going to be easy or that 5 minutes will cover it. I do believe that truth is expressed in relationships. In my theology, we're created in the Imago Dei. There are residuals of the Creator within all of creation. And when you spend time with somebody with an open heart, they get the opportunity to see that piece of the Creator in the creation. You get to see the particular strokes that made Da Vinci a master when you look at the Mona Lisa. And those may be things that you can share that that are they're not necessarily a 5-minute conversation, but you can start. I see a question from Elizabeth that says, I've sat on 125 Eagle boards, and I always ask, if you could talk with anyone dead or alive, who would you talk to and about what? It always strikes them as profound. Having a conversation with the team that makes them think is sometimes all it takes. And that is absolutely true. You know, if you want a quirky question to ask somebody in a board of review, ask this one. If I put a fresh loaf of bread right here and told you you could make 2 cuts and take 1 slice of bread, what piece of bread would you take? And there are people who say, oh man, you got to have the crust of a fresh bread. And some would say, no, right dead in the center where it's soft. And the question isn't about the piece of bread. It's about, how did you make that decision? Why did you make that decision? Was it because that was the single, I only had to cut it once, so that was less work? Or because I like this part of the bread, or I like that part of the bread? And that's where you can use a question that seems to be over here. And when you turn it around and ask, well, why did you make that decision? How did you make that decision? It opens a whole new set of doors. And just so all of you know, the presentation is going to be coming to you, a link to the presentation, so you can actually have all my slides. And the other thing is, all of my blah, blah, blah words are recorded. So I'm sorry about that, but you'll get those too.
One thing that I've reflected on from preparation for the 2017 National Jamboree is, in dealing with youth, I have been one of the ones who stated that you need to have something to be able to get their attention and make a connection within 45 seconds. And I said that to a friend of mine who happens to work in the event business, the convention business. And he listened patiently to what I said, and he said, what we tell our clients is you have 3 to 7 seconds to get their attention. And the difference is, and he held up his cell phone and said, that's how long it takes to answer a text message. And that stuck with me, because then I tried to reshape and make certain that the words that I'm going to speak are going to help them to have a connection on what we want to talk about, and that I will listen to just that quick. And it's kind of interesting that I'm still learning things. Okay, I'm still learning things, and that's the important part of it.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time, guys.
Thank you.
It's 8:01. If you want to hang out some more, I like to hang out. If you don't, Thank you for your time.
I'm happy to hang out.